I want to read you something. This is an email. It's from the private Christian school that our daughters attended. Since there have been several issues with your child this year, if there is behavior in the future that causes disruption to the student body, we will require documentation of counseling for her to remain at this school. So that wasn't even accurate. It was the last straw. Within the week, both of our girls were pulled out. We withdrew them both from 8th grade and 10th grade. But I want to tell you what happened next. It was nothing like I expected. It took 2 years to get here and to this channel, to this conversation with you. Let me start from the beginning. So, the school. We found a small private school that we were excited to send our kids to. And it was great. But there had been some issues, some ongoing things, and we had reached out that we would handle the situation privately within our family. That email landed in my inbox. And something in me just shifted. In our whole family, it just shifted. We realized we had to pull our kids out of the school. We were paying the school tuition to teach our children. My husband and I were not willing to co-parent with them. So that was it. The whole point is we withdrew both of our children after a crisis, what felt like a crisis situation. Here's the thing, that was it. We withdrew them. We were in crisis. And then I stood in the kitchen and I thought, well, now what? I had no idea what I was doing. I just knew I wasn't going to send them back to the school. This is the part that other homeschool channels don't really show you. And I want to be real about it, because if you're in it right now, if you have older kids and there's something happening and you pull them out, I want you to know you're not alone in this feeling. The first few weeks, the first few days and weeks I felt unhinged, to be honest. I am a very much a rule follower. I had never considered homeschooling our kids. They were older, and I knew of a couple of families that had done it successfully, but nobody in my family had done it. It wasn't something I had ever really considered. I had no curriculum. I had no philosophy. I knew nothing about it. I didn't know, who the homeschooling co-ops were in my community. I didn't have much of a community. So I was feeling unsettled, to say the least. Now, my daughters, especially my 14-year-old, who was 14 at the time, my 8th grader, she was thrilled. She had never been much of a student. She didn't really like school. She just didn't really like it. We had struggled with, going to school and doing homework for her whole entire life since, she had started school, preschool. She's a lot like my husband, who is very successful, but very high energy and can get a lot done. But her and I, personality-wise, are a lot different, and the way we learn is a lot different. I am a firstborn, only daughter, only granddaughter person. I'm a task list. Let's do it. Let's do this, self-guided. And my youngest child is a second-born, and my husband is a second-born, and second-born children are just different. She just, marches to her own beat, and she always has. And so I had 2 different kids and 2 different stages that, how do I handle my 16-year-old who's in 10th grade, who wants workbooks and task lists and that kind of thing, as in my other child who's more of a free spirit. So I had no idea what I was doing, and I was scared, and I was going against the grain, and I was scared because I'm a rule follower, and this was just out, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know anything about the different philosophies. There's so much information. I had information overload. I had no plan. So just the 2 teenage girls at home. My husband works at home, so it was all 4 of us home all the time. And, twiddling our thumbs, thinking, is somebody going to show up at our door and say, why aren't your kids in school? What are they getting in biology? That kind of thing. What was this going to look like? Because my kids could read, thank goodness. I did feel like that at first. I was like, oh, well, I don't have to teach them how to read or how to count or how to do math, reading, writing, and arithmetic. They knew how to do all of those basics. So it's like, well, where do they go now? The first month we just decompressed. we went and bought a whole bunch of books, and because I love books, and I started a deep dive on what homeschooling is and that kind of thing. So we were close to spring break, so we just extended that for the rest of the school year. It took me a few months to get my head around this idea of, school at home is not going to school, that kind of thing. I remember about spring break, so just a couple of weeks after we had just a couple of weeks after we had pulled the girls out, it was spring break and we were traveling, and I remember telling my husband Dale that it was time to move home, back to Indiana. I had moved from my hometown to Indianapolis in 2001, and we had moved to Memphis, Tennessee area in 2016 and lived there for, we'd lived there for several years. And I looked at him and I just knew it was time to move back, because we didn't have to uproot the kids out of school because we had already made that decision. And in the middle of all that, it just became clear it was time to move back to Indiana. Pulling the girls out of school finally made me realize that we needed to move back. Now, I want you to understand something. I swore I would never move back to my hometown in Indiana. I probably had said I would never move back to Indiana, let alone anywhere near my hometown. I really genuinely believed that. And if you ask anyone that I grew up with, anybody in my family, everyone, no one could have been more shocked than me, but all of my family was shocked. My husband had wanted to move back to Indiana, specifically to this area for many years. And I told him I'd never move back. So making this decision and telling my husband that it was time to move back was like life-changing. And yet, here's what happened. When we got real about, what we actually needed to do, that what we needed, like community, we needed roots, we needed family close by. My father had passed away, my aunt had passed away, and it was just time to move back. So we made that decision. We were moving back. And here's where it gets sticky. So at the very beginning of April of 2024, we listed our house in West Tennessee. We listed it for sale. Within a week, the market shifted abruptly. It changed a lot. The house sat, and it sat, and it sat. For 16 months, it was on the market. It took 16 months to sell that house in West Tennessee. And so we homeschooled. Through the showings, through the packing and the unpacking, when showings would fall through, when the deal fell through, when the closing fell through, when the closing got delayed for, 8 weeks, we just kept homeschooling through all of the waiting. I always often joke that I must have prayed for patience during that time, because that was the lesson and the most growth that I'd ever had, especially with patience. So through the waiting and the not knowing and the trusting and the being scared and then being angry, and when is it going to happen? When is this move going to happen? We homeschooled through all of it for over a year, just over and over. We did not join co-ops. I did one farm class with the kids that we would do twice a month, and that was wonderful. But we just didn't have a group or very much guidance. I never got any kind of curriculum, And so now when I think back about that time and how difficult it was, because in some ways it was the hardest part, the waiting and the expecting and the wanting to sell the house and wanting to move and not being able to. It was so hard to be told, not now, not yet. My timing is perfect. But it was also where we figured out quietly, without realizing it, that we could actually homeschool and that we were doing it, and we were doing it well. So we finally closed on our house and we loaded everything up. And this past July, we made it back to Indiana. It's been the best thing. Getting back to Indiana has felt like exhaling. It does feel like sometimes that we should have done it a few years before. Sometimes I think, we should have homeschooled the kids from the beginning. And of course I wish that we had. It would have been a different life, but that's just not the way the life was supposed to go. I have to be hit with a thunderbolt. I have to be backed into a corner. The Lord knows how to get through to me. And I needed this big situation. It's one of many, many big situations like this. So now here we are, it just felt like exhaling. And it's been very exciting. And I'm thankful every single day that we moved back and that we live and we were patient and we live in the house that we live in the area that we live in. But with everything, it's an adjustment. So a new house, a new town. It's not exactly my hometown, but it is very, very close. So but in the new adjustment hit, a new plan, a new community, everything new. 2 teenage daughters who are older. One has graduated and is taking classes in community college. And then I have my 16-year-old who is in 10th grade, if you still, think about it like that. And homeschooling in this part of Indiana in the state of Indiana is vastly different than it is in Tennessee, specifically in West Tennessee, in the Memphis area. So navigating that has been an adjustment as well. And I'm still getting my arms around the homeschooling thing. I still am without a curriculum. And I was like, this is it, this is what I need to be doing. About 2 months ago, we were having, some growth, adaptation. My youngest daughter said maybe she wanted to go to school. And so we had to talk about that. And I asked her, what is it that you want from school? Is it the friends? Is it you have too much time on your hands? Do you get bored? We had to have a talk about it. And I finally feel like maybe I have my arms around this whole thing of what it needs to be for us. So about 3 weeks ago, I was interested in listening to a podcast. I love podcasts, and I kind of wanted something that was relevant, but not, just something that was relevant to me. So I used ChatGPT and I typed in homeschool podcast, and it brought up about 8 different ones. And one of the podcasts was A School to Homeschool. It was under notable mentions. It's Janae Daniels. It's fantastic. The first episode that came up on my Spotify was her video with her podcast with Sherry Hayes, raising 15 geniuses using outdated curricula. Then they started talking about some of these ideas that I had been thinking about for like 2 or 3 months. From April 11th on, I have been in a deep dive about education. What really is education? What is, why is education so different than it was? Well, at first I thought it was just 50 years ago, but it's really, the way it is because of at least 125 years. Why is it different that my grandfather, who was very successful, had a family, had a job, supported his family, and only went through 8th grade. My father-in-law, same thing, went through 8th grade and was very successful. My husband, he didn't go to college right after high school. College wasn't for him. He went into the Army. He went to the School of Hard Knocks. So, why? But he's very successful. And guess what? I did go to 4-year college. I earned a degree in anthropology. And I can say I did not learn anything from my college experience. I never worked in that field. It was a waste of time. I don't regret it. I don't think it's necessary for I don't think that finding yourself in experiencing, the college experience, I don't think that is necessarily education. So I did this deep dive on the American education system. And let me tell you, it's worse than you think. When I started the deep dive into Mom Delight's channel, Sherry Hayes' channel, and Janae Daniels, her channel on YouTube, School to Homeschool, her podcast, they introduced vintage curriculum. I started reading about the state of education in the US and deep diving into it, listening to Sherry and Janae talk about the actual source of where the model for the current school model came from. What was it designed to do? What did learning look like before that? You know, what did it look like in the 1800s? And that's how I found my way to the McGuffey readers, to Ray's primer. Now, if you don't know what any of the vintage curricula is, I'm going to go ahead and do a whole video on that. But the short version is this. McGuffey's readers were the standard American curriculum for most of the 1800s. They were used in one-room schoolhouses across the country. These readers were used. They were used all across the country. They're phonics-based, which is how I learned to read. They build on each other. They were designed to be taught by one person to a group of students of mixed ages, which I love the idea of mixed ages. That's fantastic. Does that sound familiar? Then I found the Ray's primer, again, through Sherry and Janae. I started reading more about Charlotte Mason, her philosophy around living books and nature, real learning over, rote memorization. Something just landed. I love the idea of the vintage curricula because I think it works better than what is being used today. For the first time in the last 2 years, I feel like I finally have my arms around where I want to take this homeschooling journey, where I want to finish it off, because excitingly, I have a granddaughter and I have the next generation that I can help partner with her parents to educate, because learning is lifetime, and I remember things that my grandmother, who was called Nanny, I remember things Nanny taught me. Nanny could do anything, and she could get a stain out of anything. She could cook anything. She kept a clean house, and she was a very special person. She was a homemaker, a wife, and a mother, and a grandmother. Finally have this vision that we have been building towards and coming to, even with the messy and unplanned, the treading water, the middle part of it, those somewhat painful, difficult memories of that. The one-room schoolhouse isn't just a metaphor. It's like a philosophy. It's a community. I love the idea of, having a teacher and a whole family of students, children, grandchildren, children teaching, aunts teaching their nieces, nephews, that kind of thing. It's back to basics. It's community-based, family-based. It's no bureaucracy. No, it's real learning skills that are needed for life. And I get to have the influence. The hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. And that's why I'm starting this channel now, because I finally feel like I have something worth sharing. It's not a perfect system. It's going to be messy. It's not a Pinterest classroom. I'm not very good with Pinterest. It's just the last couple of years of honest experiences, a philosophy that finally makes sense. And if you're in the messy middle of this, the nervous part, the unmoored part, the one where you think I have no idea what I'm doing, then you're in the right place. I just want you to know it took us 2 years to get here, and we're just now finding our footing. So drop a comment. Tell me where you are in your journey. Are you brand new to this? Are you 2 years in like me? Are you still deciding? I want to know. I read every single comment. So go ahead and subscribe if you want to figure this out together. I'll see you next Tuesday. I will be making more content on, specifics. If you have any ideas for content, any videos you want me to make, then I'd love to hear them. If you have any advice? What do you think? All right. See you next week. Thanks. Bye.